For centuries, humanity has grappled with one of life's most profound mysteries. What truly happens to the soul after death, especially when the physical body is cremated? Across different cultures and throughout history, people have held vastly different beliefs about this sacred transition. Some ancient traditions believed that flames touched not only the flesh, but the spirit itself, causing suffering that could echo into eternity. Others imagined the soul drifting away peacefully, completely untouched and unaffected by the earthly fire consuming the body below. But what did Edgar Cayce, America's most documented psychic and one of the most fascinating spiritual figures of the 20th century, actually say about this? His readings on death, cremation, and the afterlife shocked thousands of people because they revealed truths that contradicted both traditional religious teachings and popular misconceptions. Edgar Cayce, who lived from 1877 to 1945, conducted over 14,000 psychic readings during his remarkable lifetime. Known as the Sleeping Prophet, Cayce would enter a trance-like state and access information about health, past lives, spiritual development, and the mysteries of death and the afterlife. Many of his readings specifically addressed what happens to consciousness, to the soul, and to the spiritual body during and after the cremation process. What Cayce discovered was both comforting and challenging. He revealed that while cremation certainly changes the physical body, reducing it to ash and bone fragments, the deeper and more significant impact is on consciousness itself, on memory, and on the soul's process of spiritual detachment from material existence. His teachings showed that cremation is neither a blessing nor a curse, it is simply a tool, a method that can either help or hinder the soul's transition, depending on the spiritual state of the person at death and the intentions of those left behind. Today you're going to discover 7 profound truths that Cayce revealed about the soul, cremation, and the journey beyond death. Each truth builds upon the last, creating a complete picture of what happens in those mysterious hours and days after we take our final breath. Stay with me until the very end, because the 7th truth will completely shift how you see life, death, and eternity itself. It will change the way you think about your own mortality and how you prepare for the greatest journey any of us will ever take. 1. The separation of spirit and body. According to Edgar Cayce's readings, the spirit begins to detach from the physical body at the very moment of death, but this separation is not instantaneous or complete. This was one of his most important revelations because it contradicts the common assumption that death is like flipping a switch, with the soul immediately departing the body at the last heartbeat. Instead, Cayce explained that the separation process can take hours, days, or even longer in some cases, depending entirely on the person's level of attachment to earthly life, their spiritual development, and their acceptance of death. For someone who has lived a spiritually aware life, who is prepared for death through meditation, prayer, and inner work, the separation might be quick and peaceful, perhaps only a few hours. But for someone deeply attached to material possessions, relationships, or unfinished business, the soul might linger near the body for several days. The soul is not burned by the fire of cremation, Cayce emphasized repeatedly, because by the time cremation typically occurs, usually 24 to 72 hours after death, the spirit is already moving beyond material existence. The flames cannot touch consciousness itself. Spirit and matter exist on different planes of reality, and fire, being a physical element, has no power over the non-physical essence of who we are. Yet Cayce also emphasized something crucial that many people overlook. In the early stages after death, during those first hours and days, the spirit may still sense a connection to its body. He described it as almost like a thin cord, a silvery thread of energy holding the soul and body together. This cord gradually dissolves as the soul accepts its new state and moves further into the spiritual dimensions. This is why, according to Cayce, the way we handle the body after death carries deep spiritual meaning. It's not just about respect for the deceased or following cultural traditions. It's about understanding that the soul may still be partially aware of what's happening to its former vessel. Cremation doesn't destroy the spirit or harm it in any way, but it can influence how quickly and how smoothly the soul fully detaches from physical reality. Cayce taught that treating the body with reverence, performing the cremation with sacred intention, and surrounding the process with prayer and positive thoughts all help to ease the soul's transition. Conversely, performing cremation hastily without respect or in an atmosphere of fear and negativity can create confusion for the transitioning spirit. Understanding this first truth helps us see that death is not an enemy to be feared, but a sacred passage to be honored. The separation of spirit and body is natural, beautiful, and ultimately liberating, but it requires time, patience, and conscious awareness from both the dying person and those who love them. 2. The transition period. Cayce often described death not as a sudden switch or an immediate transformation, but as a passage, a gradual journey from one state of being to another. In his readings, he explained that many spirits linger around their body and their loved ones for a short period after physical death. This is what he called the transition phase, a time when the soul gradually comes to accept its new state of existence and begins to orient itself to the spiritual dimensions. During this transition period, which can last anywhere from a few hours to several days or even weeks, the soul is in a unique state. It's no longer fully physical, but it's not yet fully adjusted to its spiritual reality either. Cayce described it as being somewhat like waking from a deep sleep. There's a period of grogginess, of confusion, of slowly remembering who you are and where you are. This is when cremation can serve as a powerful symbolic signal that the earthly life is truly over. When the body is cremated, the soul receives an unmistakable message. There is no going back. The physical vehicle is gone. There's nothing left to return to. For many souls, this clarity is exactly what they need to fully accept their death and move forward into the light. However, Cayce also warned that for souls that are heavily attached to the material world, people who identified strongly with their possessions, their social status, their physical appearance, or their earthly accomplishments, the cremation process can feel confusing or even distressing. These souls might try to cling to the familiar, not fully realizing that they are already free from the body, and that clinging is both unnecessary and impossible. Cayce explained that during this vulnerable time, the attitudes, emotions, and intentions of the living are incredibly important. The soul in transition is still sensitive to the thoughts and feelings of loved ones. When family members gather with love, acceptance, and a spirit of blessing and release, they create an atmosphere that helps guide the soul forward. Their prayers act as gentle encouragement, like hands reaching out to guide someone through darkness into light. On the other hand, when loved ones are consumed by grief, by refusal to accept the death, or by anger and fear, they create emotional ties that can actually hold the soul back. The spirit feels these heavy emotions and may remain earthbound longer than necessary, trying to comfort the living, or simply drawn to the intensity of their feelings. Cayce taught that this transition period is a sacred time. He recommended that families maintain a peaceful, prayerful atmosphere around the body and during cremation. He suggested that rather than viewing cremation as destruction, we should see it as liberation, the final release of the soul from its earthly vessel. This shift in perspective changes everything. In his words, this is when prayer, respect, and intention from the living are most important, because they help guide the soul forward. The living have a responsibility to the dead during this time, not to hold them back with our grief, but to bless them forward with our love and our faith in their continued existence. 3. Does the spirit feel physical pain? This is perhaps the question that has troubled people most deeply throughout history, and it's the one that shocked so many when they heard Cayce's answer. Does the spirit feel pain during cremation? The image of a loved one's body being consumed by flames is disturbing to many people, and the fear that somehow the soul might experience this burning has caused countless families to avoid cremation altogether. Cayce's answer was absolutely clear and unequivocal. The flames touch only the body, not the spirit. The soul does not burn, nor does it scream in agony. Physical pain requires physical nerve endings, a physical brain to process sensations, and a physical body to experience suffering. Once the spirit has separated from the body, which, as we discussed, begins at the moment of death, it no longer experiences physical sensations in the way we understand them. Fire is a material element. It acts upon material things. The soul is not material. It is consciousness, energy, essence, spirit. These exist on completely different planes of reality. To imagine that fire could burn the soul is like imagining that water could drown a thought or that a knife could cut a memory. It's a category error based on confusion about what the soul actually is. But here's where Cayce's teachings became more nuanced and more surprising to many people. While there is no physical pain, there can be emotional and spiritual distress. A soul that is deeply attached to its body, someone who identified strongly with their physical appearance, who feared death intensely, or who believed that they were nothing more than their body, might experience a sense of loss or confusion when the body is reduced to ashes. This is not pain as we know it in the physical sense. There's no burning sensation, no physical agony. Instead, it's more like a sharp realization, a moment of truth when the soul finally understands that the physical chapter is closed forever. For souls who are unprepared for this reality, who clung to materiality, this realization can be jarring. Cayce explained it this way. Imagine spending your entire life believing that you are your house, that you and your house are one and the same. Then suddenly, you find yourself standing outside watching your house burn down. You're not physically hurt, you're perfectly safe, but you might experience shock, grief, or disorientation because you believed that house was your identity. That's similar to what some souls experience during cremation. However, Cayce emphasized that this distress is temporary and is really about the soul's own resistance and attachment, not about cremation itself. The true suffering, he taught, comes not from fire but from attachment and resistance to letting go. The flames are neutral. They simply do their work. It's the soul's inner state that determines whether the experience is peaceful or difficult. This is why spiritual preparation during life is so important. People who understand that they are not their bodies, who have cultivated an awareness of their spiritual nature, who have practiced meditation or prayer or any form of inner work, these souls experience cremation and death itself with much greater peace. They understand that what's burning is just the clothing they wore for a lifetime, not who they really are. Cayce also noted that the love, prayers, and positive intentions of family and friends during cremation can create a protective, comforting atmosphere that helps ease any confusion or distress the soul might feel. This is another reason why approaching cremation with reverence and spiritual awareness matters so much. 4. The role of cremation in detachment. One of Edgar Cayce's most surprising and counterintuitive revelations was that cremation can actually accelerate the separation of spirit and body, and that this acceleration is generally beneficial for the soul's spiritual progress. This teaching contradicted many religious traditions that viewed cremation as somehow disrespectful or even harmful to the soul's journey. Cayce explained the logic behind this clearly. Because the physical vessel is destroyed quickly and completely through cremation, the soul has less temptation to hover around it, less reason to remain earthbound. The body, which was the soul's home and instrument for an entire lifetime, is gone. There's nothing left to linger near, nothing left to be attached to. In contrast, when a body is buried intact, it remains in the earth for years, slowly decomposing. During this time, souls that are heavily attached to their physical form might actually remain near the grave, not fully accepting that they have died, not fully moving on to the next stage of their journey. Cayce noted that this was especially common in cases of unexpected death, unfinished business, or souls who were very materialistic during life. Cremation removes this possibility. The body is returned to its elemental components, earth, air, fire, and water, within a few hours. The transformation is complete, undeniable, and immediate. Instead of gradually letting go over months or years, the soul is encouraged to move on to higher planes of existence right away. Cayce observed that in cultures where cremation is common and accepted, particularly in certain Eastern traditions, where it's performed with deep spiritual ritual and understanding, the spirit often transitions more swiftly and cleanly without clinging to the shell of flesh. These cultures understand cremation not as destruction, but as liberation, as the final gift to the departing soul. However, and this is crucial, Cayce also emphasized that the method of burial or cremation is ultimately secondary to the inner state of the soul. He taught that what truly matters is whether the spirit lived a life aligned with divine purpose, with love, with service, with spiritual growth. A highly evolved soul will transition smoothly, regardless of what happens to the body. Conversely, a soul trapped in materialism and fear will struggle with the transition regardless of the funeral method. Cremation may close one door faster, making physical attachment impossible, but only love, forgiveness, compassion, and spiritual readiness open the next door, the door to higher consciousness and spiritual evolution. In Cayce's view, cremation is a tool that can be helpful, but it's not a magic solution. The real work must be done during life, through spiritual development, self-awareness, and the cultivation of virtues that transcend physical existence. Cayce also taught that cremation serves another important purpose. It forces the living to confront the reality of impermanence more directly. When there's no body to visit at a gravesite, when the physical remains fit in a small urn, it becomes harder to maintain the illusion that the person is somehow still present in physical form. This can be painful for the grieving, but it's also spiritually honest. It helps everyone, both the deceased and the bereaved, to accept the truth and move forward. For these reasons, Cayce viewed cremation as a practice that aligns well with spiritual truth, though he never insisted it was the only acceptable method. He respected that different souls, different families, and different cultures would make different choices, and he emphasized that the intention and consciousness brought to any funeral practice matters more than the specific method chosen. 5. Emotional and spiritual echoes. Edgar Cayce stressed repeatedly in his readings that cremation affects not only the physical body and the departing soul, but also creates powerful emotional and spiritual echoes that resonate between the deceased and the living. This interconnection between worlds, between those who have passed and those who remain, was a central theme in much of his work on death and the afterlife. He explained that when loved ones grieve heavily over the body, when they are consumed by sorrow, guilt, or refusal to let go, their intense emotions create energetic bonds that can actually hold the spirit close to the earth plane, preventing it from moving on to the next stage of its journey. The soul, still sensitive to the feelings of those it loved in life, feels these emotions and may remain near, trying to comfort the living or simply drawn magnetically to the intensity of their grief. This is where cremation carries a profound symbolic weight. By releasing the body quickly and completely, it sends a clear message to everyone involved, the deceased, the family, and the community, that the true person was never the flesh, but the eternal soul. The body was simply a temporary vehicle, a set of clothes worn for one lifetime. Cremation makes this truth undeniable in a way that burial sometimes does not. The flames themselves can be seen as a purifying force, not just physically but symbolically. They represent transformation, release, and the return of material elements to the universe. In many spiritual traditions, fire is associated with purification, with the burning away of the old to make room for the new. Cayce acknowledged this symbolism and taught that when approached with the right consciousness, cremation can be a sacred ritual of release for everyone involved. However, Cayce also issued a strong warning. If the family clings too much to sorrow, if they resist the reality of death, if they surround the cremation with fear, horror, or excessive grief, the spirit may sense these disturbing emotions and remain near, confused or distressed. The soul may feel torn between its natural urge to move forward into the light and its love for those who are suffering. This is why Cayce placed so much emphasis on how we grieve and how we conduct funeral rites. He taught that there is a healthy way to mourn, a way that honors our love for the deceased while also blessing their journey forward. This includes prayer and meditation. Creating a peaceful, sacred atmosphere during and after cremation helps both the living and the dead. Prayer doesn't need to be religious in a dogmatic sense. It's simply focused, loving intention directed toward the highest good of the departing soul. Gratitude. Rather than focusing only on the loss, Cayce encouraged families to express gratitude for the time they had with their loved one, for the lessons learned, for the love shared. This shift from grief to gratitude transforms the emotional atmosphere from heavy to light, from binding to liberating. Blessing the transition, consciously wishing the soul well on its journey, imagining it surrounded by light and moving toward peace and joy, creates positive energy that actually helps the spirit move forward more easily. Releasing attachment. understanding that holding on too tightly to the departed actually burdens them. True love includes the willingness to let go, to trust that the soul is continuing its eternal journey. Cayce taught that these practices create harmony in the invisible realms, while fear, despair, excessive grief and resistance create echoes, emotional disturbances that can trouble the soul's peace and slow its progress. The living have more power than they realize to either help or hinder the dead during this crucial time. He also explained that these emotional and spiritual echoes don't just affect the departed soul, they affect the living as well. When we grieve in healthy ways, when we approach death with spiritual understanding rather than fear, we heal more quickly and completely. When we cling to grief, when we refuse to accept death, we create suffering for ourselves that can last for years or even decades. Cremation, approached with conscious awareness and spiritual intention, can actually facilitate healthy grieving. The finality of it, the completeness of the physical transformation, can help people accept the death more fully and begin to adjust to the new relationship they'll have with their loved one, a spiritual relationship rather than a physical one. 6. Lessons about impermanence. One of Edgar Cayce's deepest and most philosophically profound teachings was that cremation serves as a dramatic, undeniable lesson about impermanence, about the temporary nature of all physical things and the eternal nature of consciousness itself. This teaching connects his work on death and cremation to the broader spiritual wisdom found in many mystical traditions around the world. The body, which people spend an entire lifetime decorating, feeding, protecting, exercising, and worrying about, returns to ash within a matter of hours. Everything that seemed so solid, so permanent, so important, the face we showed the world, the hands that worked and created, the heart that beat for decades, all of it transforms into a handful of dust and bone fragments. In terms of sheer physical reality, cremation is perhaps the most honest confrontation with impermanence that exists. Cayce taught that this stark reality is a mirror for all material things. Nothing in the physical world lasts. Not our bodies, not our possessions, not our achievements, not our reputation, not our wealth. Everything physical is temporary, fleeting, destined to decay or transform. This is not a pessimistic teaching. It's a liberating one, if we can truly grasp its meaning. When we watch cremation or contemplate it seriously, we're forced to ask ourselves, if the body doesn't last, if all material things are temporary, then what does last? What is real? What has true value? Cayce's answer was clear. Only consciousness, only love, only spiritual development, only the growth of the soul matters in the ultimate sense. These are the things we take with us beyond death. These are our true treasures. Cremation is not an end, Cayce insisted, but a reminder that life's true essence lies beyond the material. The soul does not vanish with the smoke that rises from the crematorium. It doesn't disappear when the flames consume the flesh. Instead, it continues into realms of light, growth, learning, and spiritual evolution. The body was always just the vehicle, never the driver. The costume, never the actor. The instrument, never the musician. For Cayce, this awareness of impermanence was meant to awaken the living, to shake us out of our material obsessions and push us to detach from superficial pursuits. He taught that most people spend their lives chasing things that won't last: money, status, physical beauty, possessions, power, while neglecting the only things that are eternal: the development of virtues like compassion, wisdom, patience, forgiveness, service, and unconditional love. Cremation becomes a teaching tool, a meditation on what really matters. When we stand before the flames or hold an urn of ashes, we cannot avoid asking the big questions. Who am I really? What is the purpose of this life? What will remain of me when my body is gone? What am I building that will last beyond death? These are the questions that lead to spiritual awakening. These are the questions that cause us to reorient our lives around eternal values rather than temporary pleasures or achievements. Cayce believed that contemplating death, and particularly contemplating the finality of cremation, could be one of the most valuable spiritual practices anyone could engage in. He taught that the flames burn illusions, not souls. They burn away our attachment to the false idea that we are merely physical beings. They burn away the pretense that material things have ultimate value. They burn away the comfortable denial that allows most people to live as if they will never die. What remains after the fire is truth, that we are spiritual beings having a temporary physical experience, and that our time here should be spent wisely, lovingly, and consciously. In many of Cayce's readings, he encouraged people to meditate on death regularly, not in a morbid way, but as a practice of wisdom. By remembering that we will die, by contemplating the impermanence of the body, we become more present, more grateful, more focused on what truly matters. We stop wasting time on petty conflicts, material obsessions, and ego-driven pursuits. We start living from the soul instead of from the limited perspective of the ego. Cremation in this sense is a gift to both the dead and the living. For the dead, it's a final liberation from the physical form. For the living, it's a wake-up call, a reminder to live consciously and spiritually before our own time comes. 7. Divine mercy and the soul's journey. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, Edgar Cayce emphasized that beyond the body, beyond any method of burial or cremation, beyond all the details we've discussed, divine mercy reigns supreme. This was the ultimate truth he wanted people to understand. No matter how a person dies, no matter what happens to their body after death, no matter what mistakes they made in life, the soul is never abandoned by the divine source that created it. Cayce's readings painted a picture of the afterlife that was radically different from the punitive, fear-based teachings of many traditional religions. He didn't speak of a vengeful God sending souls to eternal damnation. Instead, he described a universe of infinite compassion, where every soul is given exactly what it needs to continue learning, growing, and evolving toward its ultimate reunion with the divine. He reminded us again and again that each spirit carries within it lessons to learn, karmic ties to resolve, and opportunities for spiritual growth. Death is not an ending. It's a transition to the next classroom in the soul's eternal education. The circumstances of death, the method of body disposal, the person's religious beliefs or lack thereof, none of these things ultimately determine the soul's fate or value. Even if a soul feels confusion during or after cremation, even if it struggles with attachment or fear, even if it made terrible mistakes during life, God's grace, divine mercy, universal love, Cayce used different terms to describe the same reality, gently guides it forward. There are helpers on the other side, what some call angels, spirit guides, or deceased loved ones, who assist every soul in its transition and help it understand its new reality. Cayce insisted that life after death is not punishment, but education. It's not about reward and punishment in the simplistic sense that many religions teach. Instead, it's about continued growth, about facing the consequences of our choices not as external punishment, but as natural learning experiences, about gradually evolving toward greater wisdom, compassion, and spiritual awareness. In this context, cremation becomes almost trivial in the grand scheme of things. Yes, it can help or hinder the initial transition, as we've discussed. Yes, approaching it with consciousness and spiritual intention matters. But in the vast scope of the soul's eternal journey, the method of body disposal is just a tiny detail, a brief moment in an infinite story. Cayce taught that what really matters is how we live, not how we die, or what happens to our body afterward. Did we love? Did we serve? Did we grow? Did we face our flaws and work to overcome them? Did we forgive others and ourselves? Did we use our talents to help and uplift others? Did we seek truth? Did we develop compassion? These are the questions that matter on the other side. Cremation, then, is not to be feared. It is only a doorway, one of many possible doorways between worlds. Whether that doorway is cremation, burial at sea, or any other method, the soul passes through it and continues its journey. The door itself doesn't determine the destination. The soul's inner development, its consciousness, its spiritual maturity. These determine where it goes and what it experiences next. The true story, Cayce taught, begins after the ashes, when the spirit discovers its freedom in eternity. Released from the heavy physical body, freed from material limitations, the soul can fly. It can explore dimensions of reality that are impossible to imagine while trapped in flesh. It can reunite with loved ones who passed before. It can review its life with perfect clarity, understanding the meaning of every experience. It can begin to plan its next incarnation, choosing the lessons it needs to learn next. This is the ultimate truth that makes all fear of death and all fear of cremation unnecessary. We are eternal beings. We cannot be destroyed. Our essence, our consciousness, our soul is indestructible. Fire can burn the body, but it cannot touch what we really are. And that eternal essence is held always in divine love, always moving forward, always evolving toward light. Cayce's final message about cremation and the soul was one of hope, trust, and liberation. He wanted us to understand that death is not an enemy, that cremation is not harmful to the soul, and that every single one of us is on an eternal journey of spiritual growth that transcends any particular lifetime or any particular method of body disposal. We are loved, we are guided, we are eternal, and knowing this changes everything about how we live and how we approach death. These 7 profound truths reveal the full picture of Edgar Cayce's teachings on cremation and the soul. Let's briefly review what we've discovered together. First, we learned that the separation of spirit and body is a gradual process that begins at death but may take hours or days to complete, and that the soul may still sense a connection to its body during this transition time. Second, we explored the transition period when the soul lingers between worlds, gradually accepting its new state, and how cremation can serve as a clear signal that earthly life has ended. Third, we confronted the fear that many people have about whether the spirit feels pain during cremation, and discovered Cayce's reassuring answer: the flames touch only the body, never the soul, though emotional and spiritual distress may occur if the soul is heavily attached to physical existence. Fourth, we learned the surprising truth that cremation can actually accelerate spiritual detachment and help the soul move forward more quickly to higher planes of existence, though the inner state of the soul matters more than the method of body disposal. Fifth, we understood how cremation creates emotional and spiritual echoes between the living and the dead, and how our grief, prayers, and intentions can either help or hinder the departing soul's journey. Sixth, we contemplated cremation as a powerful lesson about impermanence, reminding us that all material things are temporary and that only consciousness, love, and spiritual development have eternal value. And finally, seventh, we embraced the ultimate truth, that divine mercy guides every soul, that life after death is education rather than punishment, and that cremation is simply a doorway through which the eternal spirit passes on its infinite journey. What emerges from these teachings is a complete reframing of how we think about death and cremation. Cayce showed us that cremation does not harm the soul in any way. The flames are not torment. They are transition. They are not destruction. They are transformation. They teach impermanence, encourage detachment, and remind us that the soul's journey is far greater than the fate of the body. But these teachings aren't just about death and cremation. They're about how we live right now, today. If this message has shifted the way you see life, death, and eternity, take a moment to reflect deeply. Are you living in a way that prepares your soul for freedom? Are you attached to temporary things or investing in eternal values? Are you developing the qualities of consciousness, love, compassion, wisdom, service that you'll take with you beyond death? Edgar Cayce's work reminds us that we are not bodies that happen to have souls. We are souls that happen to have bodies for a brief time. When we truly grasp this truth, everything changes. Our priorities shift, our fears diminish. Our lives take on new meaning and purpose. Death becomes not an ending to fear, but a transition to embrace. Cremation becomes not a destruction to avoid, but a final liberation to honor. And life itself becomes a precious opportunity to grow, to love, to learn, and to prepare for the eternal adventure that awaits us all. If this video has spoken to you, if these 7 truths have opened your mind or touched your heart, please take a moment to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear how these teachings resonate with your own beliefs or experiences. Have you thought about your own death? Have you made plans for what will happen to your body? How do these teachings from Edgar Cayce change your perspective? And please subscribe to this channel so we can continue uncovering the powerful revelations of Edgar Cayce together. His work touched on so many profound topics: health and healing, past lives and reincarnation, meditation and spiritual development, prophecy, and the future of humanity. There's so much more wisdom to explore, and I'm committed to bringing you the most important and transformative teachings from this remarkable man. Remember, you are an eternal being on an infinite journey. Your body is temporary, but your soul is forever. Live accordingly, love deeply, grow consciously, and when your time comes to pass through the doorway of death, whether by cremation or any other means, trust that divine mercy will guide you home. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. What if everything you thought you knew about dreaming of death was completely wrong? Edgar Cayce, the most documented psychic in American history, spent decades interpreting dreams for thousands of people. And when it came to dreams about death, his readings revealed something that shocked everyone who heard it. These dreams aren't warnings, they aren't premonitions. They're something far more profound that speaks to the deepest transformation happening within your soul right now. Before we explore this mind-shifting revelation, if you're ready to understand the hidden language of your dreams, smash that like button and subscribe. Comment below if you've ever had a dream about death, and I'll mark every comment with a heart. Now let's discover what Cayce really said about these powerful dreams. Edgar Cayce gave over 14,000 documented readings during his lifetime, working primarily from Virginia Beach, Virginia. His ability to enter a trance state and access profound information about health, spirituality, and human consciousness made him one of the most studied figures in metaphysical history. The Association for Research and Enlightenment preserves all of his readings, and within this vast archive, a clear pattern emerges about how Cayce interpreted dreams involving death. Born in Hopkinsville, Kentucky in 1877, Cayce discovered his unusual abilities as a young man. But it wasn't until he began giving readings for people seeking guidance that the full scope of his gift became apparent. His work with dreams became one of the most valuable aspects of his legacy, providing a framework that people still use today to decode the mysterious messages that come through during sleep. According to Cayce's philosophy, dreams serve as direct communication from the subconscious mind and the soul. He taught that our dreams use symbolic language, and that this symbolism is deeply personal, yet follows universal principles. Death appearing in dreams was one of the most common concerns people brought to him during his readings throughout the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s. People would come to him terrified, convinced they had seen visions of their own demise or the loss of loved ones. Here's what made Cayce's interpretation revolutionary. He consistently explained that death in dreams represents transformation and change, not physical death. In his framework, the subconscious mind uses death as a symbol for the ending of one phase of life and the beginning of another. This wasn't just philosophical speculation. Cayce's readings provided specific insights into what different death scenarios meant, creating a comprehensive system for understanding these powerful dream symbols. When someone dreamed of their own death, Cayce's readings indicated this symbolized the death of old habits, old ways of thinking, or outdated aspects of the personality. The dreamer was being shown that a part of their former self was passing away to make room for growth and evolution. This is the soul's way of preparing consciousness for transformation. The ego resists change because it finds identity and security in familiar patterns. But the soul knows that growth requires the death of what no longer serves. Think about the caterpillar entering the chrysalis. To the caterpillar, this might feel like death. The entire structure of what it was must dissolve. But this apparent death is actually the doorway to becoming the butterfly. Cayce taught that our dreams of death often come at these chrysalis moments in our lives when we're about to undergo metamorphosis into a more evolved version of ourselves. But the interpretation went deeper. Cayce taught that dreams of others dying often reflected changes in the relationship with that person, or changes in the qualities that person represented to the dreamer. If you dreamed of a parent dying, it might symbolize growing independence and the death of childhood patterns. A dream of a friend's death could represent the transformation of that friendship, or the ending of what that friend symbolized in your life. Perhaps that friend represented your carefree youth, and the dream indicated you were moving into a more responsible phase of life. The historical context matters here. During the Great Depression and through World War II, Cayce was giving readings to people facing unprecedented uncertainty and change. Dreams about death were incredibly common during these turbulent times. Families were being separated, livelihoods were being destroyed, and the entire social fabric of America was being tested. Yet Cayce's consistent message remained. These dreams were showing internal transformation, not predicting tragedy. His readings during these difficult years provided comfort and perspective. When the outer world was falling apart, Cayce helped people understand that their dreams were showing them the inner work of adaptation and transformation. The old ways of thinking about security, identity, and purpose were dying, and new understandings were being born. The dreams reflected this massive collective and individual shift. Cayce's approach to dream interpretation was part of his larger teaching about the nature of consciousness. He believed that death itself was simply a transition, not an ending. The soul continues its journey beyond physical death, carrying its experiences and lessons forward. Therefore, when death appeared symbolically in dreams, it carried the same meaning of transition and transformation rather than finality. The subconscious was using the most powerful symbol available to communicate that significant change was occurring. In his readings, Cayce emphasized that the dreamer should look at what was happening in their waking life. What patterns were they ready to release? What aspects of themselves were evolving? The death symbol in dreams was actually a positive sign from the deeper self that growth was taking place, even if it felt uncomfortable or frightening. He would often encourage people to embrace these dreams, rather than fear them, to see them as confirmation that their soul was actively working on their development. This interpretation aligned with Cayce's broader spiritual philosophy drawn from his readings. He taught that the soul is on a continuous journey of development through many experiences and even multiple lifetimes. From this perspective, death and rebirth are natural cycles not just in physical existence, but in consciousness itself. Every major life change involves a death of what was and a birth of what is becoming. We die and are reborn many times within a single lifetime as we shed old identities and step into new ones. Consider how different you are from who you were 10 years ago. The person you were then had certain beliefs, certain fears, certain dreams. That person, in a very real sense, has died. You've been through experiences that transformed you. You've learned things that changed your perspective. You faced challenges that reshaped your character. The you that exists today is a new creation, born from the death of previous versions of yourself. What makes Cayce's dream interpretation particularly compelling is how it connected to his other work. His health readings often identified that physical symptoms had emotional or spiritual roots. Persistent illness might be the body's way of forcing someone to slow down and reevaluate their life. Similarly, his dream readings showed that nighttime visions of death often preceded or accompanied major life transitions like career changes, relationship shifts, or spiritual awakenings. He saw the human being as an integrated system where physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual levels all communicated with each other. Dreams were one of the primary channels through which the spiritual self could send messages to the conscious mind. When those messages involved death symbolism, they were often the most urgent and important communications the soul could send. The practical application of this understanding is profound. When you have a dream involving death, instead of fearing it as a premonition, Cayce's framework invites you to ask different questions. What in your life is ending? What transformation are you resisting or moving through? What old version of yourself is ready to be released? These questions shift you from a position of fear to a position of curiosity and self-exploration. Cayce's readings suggested that these dreams often come at threshold moments. They appear when consciousness is ready to make a leap forward, but the ego personality is holding on to familiar patterns. The dream of death is the soul's way of saying that letting go is not only safe, but necessary for your evolution. It's the internal wisdom of your being trying to prepare you for necessary change. Imagine standing at the edge of a river you must cross. The The shore you're on represents your current life, your current identity. The far shore represents who you're becoming, the life that awaits you. The river itself, with its flowing water, represents the transition, the death of the old and birth of the new. Dreams of death are your soul showing you this river and saying it's time to cross. The fear you feel is natural, but the crossing is necessary. This understanding extends to dreams of symbolic death scenarios. Dreams of funerals, according to Cayce's interpretive framework, represented the formal ending of a life chapter and the acknowledgement of that ending. A funeral is a ritual of closure, a way of honoring what was while accepting that it has passed. When you dream of attending a funeral, your subconscious is helping you create closure around something that has ended or needs to end in your waking life. Dreams of near-death experiences in which the dreamer survives indicated that a transformation was being completed successfully. These dreams often involve coming very close to death, but being pulled back or choosing to return. In Cayce's framework, this symbolizes that you've gone to the edge of major change. You've looked into the abyss of transformation, and you're now ready to integrate what you've learned and return to life renewed. Dreams of being at the moment of death, that liminal space between life and death, often represented being in the midst of a major transition. You're neither who you were nor who you're becoming. You're in that uncomfortable in-between space, where the old has been released but the new hasn't fully formed. These dreams can feel eerie or unsettling, but they're actually documenting a sacred moment of metamorphosis. The symbolism was always pointing toward internal psychological and spiritual processes. Cayce taught that the subconscious mind is incredibly creative and will use whatever imagery is most powerful to get the conscious mind's attention. Since death is one of the most emotionally charged experiences humans face, it becomes one of the most effective symbols for communicating about major change. Throughout his decades of work, Cayce maintained that dreams were one of the most valuable tools for self-understanding. He encouraged people to keep dream journals and to look for patterns and recurring symbols. When death appeared as a symbol, he urged people to examine it without fear, recognizing it as guidance from the deeper self. He believed that if people learned to read their dreams, they would have access to profound wisdom that could guide them through life's challenges. The practice of keeping a dream journal was central to Cayce's recommendations. He suggested writing down dreams immediately upon waking, before the conscious mind could filter or forget the details. Over time, patterns would emerge. You might notice that you dream of death during periods of major change. You might see that certain types of death dreams correlate with specific life situations. This awareness turns dreams from random nocturnal experiences into a sophisticated guidance system. The Cayce philosophy teaches that consciousness is constantly evolving. What worked for you 5 years ago may not serve you today. The relationships, beliefs, and identities that shaped your past may need to die for your future self to emerge. Dreams about death are the subconscious mind's way of facilitating this necessary transformation. They're preparing you, warning you in the positive sense, helping you understand that change is coming or needs to come. In the broader context of Cayce's work on consciousness, this interpretation of death dreams connects to his teachings about karma and soul growth. He taught that the soul chooses experiences for learning and development. Sometimes that development requires the death of limiting beliefs or destructive patterns. The dream state is where the soul can communicate this need most clearly, away from the noise and resistance of the waking ego. Cayce's readings on karma emphasize that we're not victims of fate, but active participants in our evolution. The challenges we face, the changes we undergo, are all opportunities for growth. When we resist necessary change, life has ways of forcing it upon us, often through crisis or difficulty. But when we cooperate with transformation, when we listen to the messages in our dreams and willingly release what needs to die, the process becomes smoother and more graceful. Modern psychology has actually validated many of Cayce's insights about dream symbolism. Carl Jung, working around the same time period, also taught that death in dreams represents transformation and the ending of psychological phases. Jung spoke of the death and rebirth of the ego, the dissolution of old structures of consciousness to make way for new ones. But Cayce's readings went further. connecting these personal transformations to the soul's larger journey across lifetimes and dimensions of consciousness. Where Jung focused primarily on psychological transformation within a single lifetime, Cayce's perspective was more expansive. He saw each lifetime as one chapter in the soul's vast book of experience. The deaths we experience in dreams, then, aren't just about this lifetime's changes. They can also connect to the soul's memory of actual deaths in previous incarnations, or to the soul's understanding that physical death itself is just another transformation in its eternal journey. For those experiencing recurring dreams about death, Cayce's readings would suggest this indicates a significant transformation that the conscious mind is resisting. The dream repeats because the message hasn't been fully received or integrated. It's like receiving an important letter in the mail but never opening it. The sender, in this case your soul, keeps sending the same message in hopes that you'll finally pay attention and act on what it's telling you. Once you acknowledge the change that needs to happen and begin cooperating with it, these dreams typically cease. The subconscious no longer needs to send such dramatic messages because you've gotten the point and you're taking action. This is one of the beautiful validations of Cayce's interpretive framework. When people actually apply the insights from their death dreams and make the necessary changes in their waking lives, the dreams stop or transform into new messages about the next phase of growth. The message from Cayce's work is ultimately one of empowerment. You are not a victim of your dreams or of the changes they symbolize. You are a soul in the process of growth and evolution. Death dreams are confirmation that you're moving forward, even when it doesn't feel comfortable. They're evidence that your deeper self is actively working on your development. Instead of being frightened by these dreams, you can feel honored that your soul trusts you enough to show you what's really happening beneath the surface of your conscious awareness. What Cayce revealed about death dreams fundamentally shifts how we can relate to these powerful nighttime experiences. Instead of waking in fear, we can wake in curiosity. Instead of seeing omens of tragedy, we can recognize invitations to transformation. The death appearing in your dreams is making space for the new life waiting to emerge within you. It's clearing away the old to make room for the new, like a gardener pruning dead branches, so the tree can put its energy into fresh growth. This wisdom from the Cayce readings has profound implications for how we navigate change in our waking lives. If we can embrace the symbolic deaths that our dreams show us, we become more flexible and resilient in facing life's inevitable transitions. We learn to see endings not as failures, but as necessary passages to new beginnings. Every sunset makes way for a sunrise. Every autumn leads to spring. Death and rebirth are woven into the very fabric of existence. The documentation of Cayce's dream interpretation work spans decades and thousands of individual readings. The consistency of his message about death symbolism gives it particular weight. Whether he was giving readings in Kentucky during his earlier years or in Virginia Beach during his later period, the core teaching remained the same. Death in dreams is transformation in consciousness. This consistency across decades and thousands of readings suggests that Cayce tapped into a fundamental truth about how the human psyche works. Consider also the cultural context of Cayce's work. In the early to mid-20th century, dream interpretation was not as widely accepted or understood as it is today. Sigmund Freud had introduced the idea that dreams had meaning, but his interpretations were often focused on sexual symbolism and repressed desires. Cayce's approach was more spiritual and holistic, recognizing dreams as communications from the soul rather than just expressions of unconscious conflicts. His work helped legitimize spiritual approaches to dream interpretation in American culture. The Association for Research and Enlightenment, established to preserve and study his readings, became a center for dream study. People from all walks of life came to learn Cayce's methods for understanding their dreams. His influence extended beyond those who received personal readings from him to countless others who studied his work and applied his principles to their own dream exploration. One fascinating aspect of Cayce's dream philosophy is how it addresses the fear of death itself. In a culture that often treats death as the ultimate enemy, the ultimate tragedy, Cayce's teachings offer a radically different perspective. If death in dreams symbolizes transformation and growth, And if physical death itself is also a transformation rather than an ending, then death loses its sting. It becomes part of the natural rhythm of existence, rather than something to be feared and avoided at all costs. This doesn't mean Cayce encouraged recklessness with physical life. His health readings showed deep respect for the body as a temple of the soul. But he taught that death, whether symbolic in dreams or literal in physical reality, is a doorway rather than a wall. This perspective can fundamentally change how we live. When we're not paralyzed by the fear of death, we become more fully alive. We take risks that serve our growth. We release relationships and situations that no longer serve us. We embrace change rather than clinging desperately to the familiar. Cayce's readings also address the emotional component of death dreams. He recognized that even when we understand intellectually that these dreams are symbolic, they can still evoke powerful feelings of grief, fear, or anxiety. He encouraged people to honor these emotions rather than dismiss them. The feelings are real even when the death is symbolic. Grieving the end of a life chapter, the death of who you used to be, is legitimate and necessary. In fact, allowing yourself to feel the grief that comes with transformation is part of the process. If you dream of death and wake up feeling sad, that sadness might be your psyche's way of releasing the old and making space for the new. Tears can be cleansing. They can be the water that nourishes new growth. Cayce understood that transformation isn't just a mental or spiritual process, but an emotional one as well. The relationship between death dreams and spiritual awakening is another dimension of Cayce's teachings. Many people who undergo spiritual awakening experiences report having dreams of death beforehand or during the awakening process. This makes perfect sense in Cayce's framework. Spiritual awakening often involves the death of the ego's dominance and the birth of soul-centered consciousness. The old way of seeing yourself and the world dies, and a new perception is born. This can be one of the most challenging transformations a person undergoes, because it challenges the very foundation of identity. Who are you if not the collection of preferences, opinions, and characteristics you've built up over a lifetime? Who are you when those structures dissolve? The death dreams that accompany spiritual awakening are preparing you for this ego death, helping you understand at a deep level that you are more than your personality, that your essence continues even when your self-concept transforms. Cayce's work in Virginia Beach during his later years attracted people from all over the country, seeking guidance on spiritual matters. His dream readings became particularly sought after, as word spread about the profound insights he offered. People would bring their most troubling dreams, their most confusing nighttime visions, and Cayce would help them decode the messages their souls were sending. His interpretations often brought relief and clarity, transforming fear into understanding. The practical methods Cayce recommended for working with death dreams are still applicable today. First, as mentioned, keep a dream journal. Second, when you have a death dream, ask yourself what in your life is changing or needs to change. Third, instead of pushing away the uncomfortable feelings the dream brings up, sit with them and explore them. What are you being asked to release? What are you afraid of losing? Often the fear of losing something is what keeps us trapped in situations that no longer serve us. Fourth, look for the gift in the transformation. Every ending makes space for a new beginning. What possibilities open up when the old dies? If you dream of the death of your career identity, perhaps it's time to pursue work that truly fulfills you. If you dream of the death of a relationship, perhaps it's time to examine whether that relationship supports your highest good. The death is not punishment, but liberation. Fifth, consider talking to others about your dreams. Cayce often worked with people in groups, and he recognized the value of community in understanding spiritual experiences. When you share your death dreams with trusted friends or therapists or spiritual counselors, you may gain insights you couldn't access alone. Others can offer perspectives that illuminate aspects of the dream you hadn't considered. As you reflect on this understanding, consider your own dreams and the changes happening in your life right now. Where are you being called to let go? What aspect of your old self is ready to die so that your emerging self can fully live? What would it mean to cooperate with the transformation rather than resist it? The answers to these questions may be already waiting in your dreams, speaking in the powerful symbolic language that Cayce spent his life helping people understand. The legacy of Edgar Cayce's work with dreams continues through the thousands of people who study his readings and apply his principles. His son, Hugh Lynn Cayce, continued the work through the Association for Research and Enlightenment, helping to organize and categorize the vast amount of material his father had produced. Dream study groups formed around the country, using Cayce's framework to explore the nighttime messages of the unconscious. What makes Cayce's approach so enduring is its combination of spiritual depth and practical applicability. He wasn't offering abstract theories, but concrete tools that people could use to improve their lives. His interpretation of death dreams exemplifies this. It takes something frightening and transforms it into something empowering. It gives people agency in their own transformation, rather than leaving them feeling like victims of incomprehensible forces. In our current era of rapid change and uncertainty, Cayce's teachings about death dreams feel more relevant than ever. We're collectively undergoing massive transformations in how we work, how we relate, how we understand our place in the world. Many people report an increase in vivid dreams, including death dreams during times of collective upheaval. Cayce's framework helps us understand that these aren't signs of apocalypse, but signs of metamorphosis. The old world is dying so a new one can be born, both collectively and individually. If this exploration of Cayce's teachings has opened your mind to new possibilities, show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing for more revelations about consciousness and the mysteries of human potential. Drop a comment sharing your biggest takeaway or your own experience with dreams about death. I'll be reading every comment and marking them with a heart. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that their dreams aren't warnings, but wisdom from their deeper self. The transformation you're seeking is already beginning in the hidden realms of your consciousness, and now you have the keys to understand what your soul is trying to tell you. Edgar Cayce gave over 14,000 documented readings during his lifetime, and a significant portion of them dealt with one of humanity's biggest questions: what happens after we die? His descriptions of the afterlife weren't vague or mystical nonsense. They were detailed, consistent across decades, and they challenged conventional religious views of his time. What makes his perspective unique is that he described death not as an ending, but as a transition of consciousness that follows specific patterns and stages. Before we explore what Cayce actually taught about the afterlife, if you're interested in authentic spiritual knowledge without the BS, hit that like button. Drop a comment below sharing what you want to know most about life after death, and I'll heart every single comment. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss content about Cayce's genuine teachings. Now let's dive into what the sleeping prophet revealed about our journey beyond physical death. The foundation of Cayce's teachings on death centers on one core principle: consciousness is eternal and doesn't cease when the body stops functioning. According to his readings preserved at the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach, death is simply the soul's transition from one dimension of existence to another. He described it as natural as being born, just moving in the opposite direction. The physical body is like a vehicle we use for a specific journey, and when that journey ends, consciousness continues in a different form. Cayce explained that immediately after death, there's a period he called the transition phase. During this time, the soul gradually separates from the physical body. This isn't instantaneous for everyone. Some souls transition quickly, while others may linger near the physical plane, especially if death was sudden or traumatic, or if the person had extremely strong attachments to physical life. He emphasized that this transition period varies greatly depending on the individual's spiritual development and their understanding of what's happening. One of the most fascinating aspects of Cayce's afterlife teachings involves what he called the borderland or intermediate realm. This isn't heaven or hell in the traditional sense. It's described as a dimension where souls review their most recent life experience. Think of it as a processing station for consciousness. Here, the soul encounters thought forms and conditions that reflect the mental and spiritual state they cultivated during physical life. If someone lived with fear, anger, or negativity dominating their consciousness, they experience that reflection. If they cultivated love, compassion, and spiritual awareness, they experienced those conditions. Cayce was clear that this isn't punishment from an external judge. It's the natural law of cause and effect playing out in the mental and spiritual dimensions. The soul essentially creates its own experience based on what it has built in consciousness. This aligns with his repeated teaching that thoughts are things, and what we hold in mind becomes our reality, both in physical life and beyond. According to Cayce's readings, souls don't stay in this border realm indefinitely. There's a progression that occurs. He taught about different planes or dimensions of existence that souls can inhabit based on their level of spiritual development. These aren't physical places with geography. They're states of consciousness, frequencies of vibration that the soul attunes to based on its evolution. The readings describe how more evolved souls move toward what he called the Christ consciousness level, a state of unified awareness and unconditional love. Less developed souls might remain in lower vibrational states, working through patterns of selfishness, materialism, or other limiting consciousness until they're ready to progress. But here's the key point Cayce emphasized repeatedly. Every soul is on a journey back to the source, back to complete unity with the creative forces. No soul is ever lost or condemned eternally. One of the most discussed elements in Cayce's afterlife teachings is the life review. He described this as a comprehensive experience, where the soul witnesses every action, word, and thought from the life just lived. But it's not just watching a movie of your life. According to Cayce, you experience the effects of your actions from the perspective of everyone you interacted with. You feel what they felt because of what you did or said. This creates a profound understanding of how we impact others, and why certain spiritual principles like treating others as you'd want to be treated aren't just moral suggestions, but cosmic laws. This life review serves a specific purpose in Cayce's framework. It's not about guilt or shame, it's about learning and growth. The soul gains complete clarity about the lessons that lifetime was meant to teach, where growth occurred and where opportunities were missed. This understanding then influences the soul's choices about future incarnations and continued spiritual development. Cayce taught that souls maintain their individuality after death. You don't dissolve into some cosmic soup and lose your identity. Your personality, memories, and essence continue. However, the readings explain that souls gain a broader perspective. They can access memories from previous incarnations more easily. They can perceive multiple dimensions simultaneously. The limitations of physical brain and linear time fall away, allowing for expanded awareness. Another crucial aspect of Cayce's afterlife teachings involves the concept of soul groups and spiritual helpers. He described how souls who have strong connections, whether from the recent life or from past incarnations, often remain connected after death. Family members, close friends, and others who shared significant bonds can interact in the afterlife dimensions. He also spoke about more advanced souls who serve as guides and teachers, helping newly transitioned souls understand their new state of being and navigate the spiritual dimensions. The readings emphasize that communication between the living and the deceased is possible, but Cayce warned against obsessive attempts to contact the dead. He taught that this can actually hinder the deceased person's spiritual progress by pulling their consciousness back toward the physical plane when they should be moving forward in their development. However, he acknowledged that spontaneous contacts, dreams, and intuitive connections naturally occur, especially between souls with deep bonds. Cayce's perspective on heaven and hell differs radically from traditional religious views. He didn't describe physical locations of eternal reward or punishment. Instead, he taught that these are states of consciousness. Heaven is the experience of being in harmony with divine love and creative purpose. Hell is the experience of being separated from that source through one's own choices and consciousness. But even this state isn't permanent. The readings consistently emphasize that every soul has infinite opportunities for growth and redemption. One of the more challenging concepts in Cayce's afterlife teachings is the idea that souls choose to reincarnate. After the transition period, life review, and time in the spiritual dimensions for rest and learning, souls eventually feel drawn to return to physical existence. This isn't forced upon them. According to Cayce, it's a choice made with the guidance of higher spiritual teachers and based on what the soul needs to learn next. The readings explain that Earth is like a school for souls. We come here repeatedly to work on specific lessons, to develop certain qualities, and to balance karma from previous actions. Between incarnations in the afterlife dimensions, souls can plan the general circumstances of their next life, choosing parents, locations, and situations that will provide optimal opportunities for growth. However, Cayce emphasized that free will always operates. The details of how any life unfolds depend on the choices made while incarnate. Cayce taught about what he called the Akashic records, which he accessed during his trance states. He described these as a cosmic library containing the complete record of every soul's journey through all incarnations and experiences. After death, souls have access to these records in ways they don't while physically embodied. This allows for profound understanding of one's complete spiritual history and the patterns that have developed across lifetimes. The purpose of this access isn't just information gathering, it's about gaining wisdom. Souls can see how certain patterns of behavior or thought have repeated across incarnations. They can understand root causes of fears, talents, relationships, and challenges in the life just ended by seeing how those threads connect to earlier experiences. This comprehensive view helps the soul make more informed choices about continued development. In many of his readings about death and the afterlife, Cayce emphasized the importance of how we live while in physical form. He taught that spiritual preparation for death should be a natural part of life, not something we think about only when death approaches. The consciousness we build, the love we express, the service we give, and the spiritual truths we live by all determine the quality of our afterlife experience and the trajectory of our soul's evolution. Cayce was adamant that death should not be feared. In his view, informed by thousands of readings, death is a natural transition that every soul has experienced many times before. The fear of death, he taught, often comes from materialistic consciousness that over-identifies with the physical body and physical existence. As souls awaken to their true nature as eternal spiritual beings, the fear naturally dissolves. The readings also address what happens to souls who die suddenly or violently, whether through accidents, war, or other tragedies. Cayce taught that the manner of death doesn't determine the soul's afterlife experience. What matters is the state of consciousness the person had developed during life. A person who dies suddenly can transition just as peacefully as someone who dies naturally after a long life, provided they had cultivated spiritual awareness and lived according to spiritual principles. One aspect that many people find comforting in Cayce's teachings is his description of reunion with loved ones after death. He confirmed that souls who shared deep bonds in physical life do recognize and reunite with each other in the afterlife dimensions. However, the nature of these relationships may shift. The readings explain that we view our relationships from a soul level rather than just the roles we played in one particular lifetime. A spouse might also be recognized as a soul companion from multiple previous incarnations, and the connection encompasses all those experiences. Cayce taught that time functions differently in the afterlife dimensions. Without the limitations of physical existence and linear time, souls can experience what seems like extended periods of learning and growth in what would be mere moments in Earth time. This is why he sometimes described souls spending long periods in the spiritual dimensions between incarnations, while others might return relatively quickly. It's not about Earth years, but about the soul's internal experience and readiness. The readings address the question of what happens to consciousness during the dying process itself. Cayce described a gradual loosening of the soul from the physical body, often beginning before the actual moment of clinical death. He spoke about the silver cord, an energetic connection between the soul and body that finally severs at death. During near-death experiences, this cord remains intact, allowing the soul to return to the body. Once it severs completely, the transition is irreversible for that incarnation. Cayce emphasized that the afterlife isn't static. Souls don't just arrive at a particular level and stay there forever. There's constant growth, learning, and progression available. The spiritual dimensions contain opportunities for study, creative expression, service to others, and deepening understanding of universal laws. Souls who are interested in particular fields can pursue those interests. Those drawn to helping others can serve in various capacities. The afterlife, in Cayce's description, is dynamic and purposeful. One of the profound implications of Cayce's afterlife teachings is the continuity of purpose. He taught that the goals and aspirations we develop in physical life don't end at death. If someone was passionate about healing others, that desire continues and can be expressed in different ways in the afterlife dimensions. If someone was drawn to music, art, or any creative expression, those interests persist and can be developed further. The essence of who we are remains consistent even as the form of expression changes. The readings also discuss the concept of spiritual laws that govern existence in both physical and non-physical dimensions. Cayce taught that laws like cause and effect, like attracts like, and what you sow you reap, operate universally. Understanding these laws helps souls navigate the afterlife more consciously and make better choices about their continued development. Ignorance of these laws doesn't exempt anyone from their effects, which is why spiritual education during physical life is so valuable. Cayce addressed the misconception that death solves all problems. He was clear that transitioning out of the body doesn't automatically make a soul enlightened or free from the patterns of consciousness they developed during life. A person who was habitually angry, fearful, or selfish doesn't instantly become loving and wise just because they died. The work of transforming consciousness continues in the afterlife dimensions. This is actually hopeful news because it means growth is always possible, but it also emphasizes the importance of doing that work while physically incarnate. The readings describe how souls at different levels of development experience the afterlife differently. A soul that's relatively young in terms of incarnations and spiritual evolution might remain closer to the earth plane, still very identified with material concerns. A more advanced soul moves into higher dimensions of consciousness, characterized by greater light, love, and understanding. But Cayce stressed that there's no judgment in this. Every soul is exactly where they need to be for their current level of development. One fascinating detail in Cayce's afterlife teachings involves the concept of soul rest. After particularly difficult incarnations or extended periods of service, souls can choose periods of what he described as rest or regeneration in the spiritual dimensions. This isn't sleep in the physical sense, but a state of peaceful integration where the lessons and experiences from recent incarnations are fully absorbed before the soul moves on to new activities or eventual reincarnation. Cayce taught that the afterlife includes opportunities for souls to work on correcting mistakes from the physical life just ended. If someone recognizes they caused harm to others, they can engage in spiritual work to balance that karma before reincarnating. This might involve service to other souls, deep inner transformation, or preparation for specific situations in the next incarnation where they'll have opportunities to express opposite qualities. The readings emphasize the role of intention and desire in the afterlife. Because consciousness is less constrained by physical limitations, thought becomes more immediately creative. What a soul holds in mind and heart manifests more quickly in the afterlife dimensions than it typically does in physical life. This is why Cayce stressed the importance of developing positive, constructive thought patterns during physical existence. Those patterns continue after death and shape the soul's experience. Another key teaching involves the idea that souls can continue to learn and grow in the afterlife by observing and even assisting those still in physical incarnation. More advanced souls who have completed their need for physical reincarnation can choose to serve as guides and teachers for souls still cycling through Earth experiences. This service is considered a high form of spiritual work and continues the soul's evolution, even though they're no longer incarnating physically. Cayce's perspective on judgment is particularly interesting. He didn't teach that God or any external entity judges souls and assigns them to heaven or hell. Instead, souls judge themselves. In the clarity of the afterlife perspective, without the ego defenses and rationalizations that operate during physical life, souls see themselves with complete honesty. They understand the effects of their actions and the level of consciousness they achieved. This self-judgment is actually more penetrating than any external judgment could be, and it motivates the soul's desire for continued growth. The readings discuss the concept of spiritual attunement, which is as important in the afterlife as it is during physical life. Souls who practiced meditation, prayer, and spiritual alignment while embodied find these practices natural and beneficial in the afterlife dimensions. Those who never developed such practices may need to learn them in the afterlife or may remain in states of confusion until they're ready to seek help from more advanced souls who serve as teachers and guides. Cayce taught that death doesn't mean the end of personality or individual traits. Someone who had a great sense of humor retains that quality. Someone who was deeply compassionate continues to express compassion. The core essence of the individual persists. What changes is the soul gains broader perspective, releases attachments to physical concerns, and has access to greater knowledge about their true spiritual nature and purpose. One of the more esoteric aspects of Cayce's afterlife teachings involves the concept that souls can experience different dimensions or planes of existence simultaneously in the afterlife. Unlike physical life, where we're locked into one space and time, consciousness after death can be multidimensional. A soul might be engaged in learning on one plane while also providing inspiration or guidance to loved ones still on Earth on another level of awareness. The readings explain that preparation for death is essentially the same as preparation for living well. Cayce taught that if you're living according to spiritual principles, expressing love, serving others, and working on your own spiritual development, you're automatically preparing for a positive afterlife experience. There's no special ritual or last-minute confession needed. The consciousness you've built through how you've lived determines what you experience after death. Cayce addressed the question of what happens to people who don't believe in an afterlife or spirituality. According to his readings, belief or disbelief doesn't change the reality of what occurs after death. Someone who expected oblivion will be surprised to find their consciousness continues. However, they might initially experience confusion or remain in states closer to the physical plane until they accept their new reality and seek to understand it. Eventually, all souls come to awareness of their spiritual nature, regardless of what they believe during physical life. The concept of meeting spiritual teachers or masters after death appears throughout Cayce's readings. He described how souls, particularly those ready for significant advancement, can encounter highly evolved beings who serve as mentors in the spiritual dimensions. These teachers might be souls the person knew from previous incarnations, or they might be beings who specialize in guiding souls through particular stages of development. The key is that help is always available for souls genuinely seeking to progress. Cayce's afterlife teachings include the idea that souls can visit and observe places and people on Earth even after death, though he cautioned that this isn't the same as being earthbound. Advanced souls might choose to be aware of conditions on Earth to better serve or guide those still incarnate. However, souls still attached to material concerns might hover around physical locations or people, which can interfere with their own progression. The difference is between conscious choice and unconscious attachment. The readings discuss how souls process emotions after death. Physical emotions tied to the body, brain chemistry, and hormones naturally fall away. However, the essential emotional nature of the soul continues. Love, compassion, joy, and other higher emotions are actually enhanced and experienced more purely without physical limitations. Lower emotions like jealousy, hatred, and fear persist only if the soul remains identified with those patterns of consciousness, and part of afterlife development involves transforming these into higher expressions. One of Cayce's most hopeful teachings about the afterlife is the absolute certainty of continued existence and the opportunity for every soul to eventually reach the highest levels of spiritual consciousness. No soul is beyond redemption. No matter how many mistakes were made or how far a soul has strayed from its divine nature, the path back is always available. The journey might take many incarnations and long periods in the afterlife dimensions, but ultimate reunion with the Source is the destiny of every soul. Cayce taught that the afterlife experience includes access to spiritual teachers and teachings that can dramatically accelerate a soul's development. Without the distractions and limitations of physical existence, souls can absorb spiritual truth more rapidly. This is one reason why the periods between incarnations are so valuable. Souls can gain understanding and make progress that might have taken multiple lifetimes to achieve, while dealing with the challenges of physical existence. The readings address what happens to unfinished business when someone dies. Cayce taught that souls carry awareness of incomplete tasks, unresolved relationships, and unfulfilled purposes into the afterlife. This awareness doesn't torment them, but it does influence their planning for future incarnations. Opportunities to complete what was started, to heal broken relationships, and to fulfill thwarted purposes can be built into the circumstances of the next physical life. Throughout all his afterlife teachings, Cayce consistently emphasized that death is not the great mystery or terror that humans often make it. It's a natural transition that becomes increasingly familiar as we understand our true nature as eternal spiritual beings. The fear and mystery surrounding death come from identification with physical existence and ignorance of our spiritual reality. As consciousness expands and we remember our true nature, death is recognized as simply moving from one room to another in the vast mansion of existence. The implications of Cayce's afterlife teachings for how we should live are profound. If consciousness continues, if we review our lives from the perspective of everyone we affected, if we carry our developed consciousness into the afterlife and future incarnations, then how we choose to live each moment matters immensely. Every thought, word, and action is not just affecting this life but rippling through eternity. Cayce taught that the afterlife isn't separate from physical life. They're part of one continuous journey of soul evolution. What we learn and develop in physical incarnation serves us in the afterlife dimensions. What we understand and prepare in the afterlife dimensions helps us make better choices in our next incarnation. It's all one unified process of the soul, gradually awakening to its true nature as a divine, eternal being. Now that you've heard what Edgar Cayce actually taught about the afterlife based on his documented readings, I want to know your thoughts. Drop a comment below about which aspect resonated most with you. Was it the life review? The continuation of consciousness? The opportunity for growth in the afterlife? Hit that like button if this changed your perspective on death, and share this with someone who needs to hear these teachings. Subscribe so you don't miss more authentic Edgar Cayce content that cuts through the noise and delivers his actual teachings. I'll heart every comment, because this community is what makes sharing this knowledge worthwhile. Remember, according to Cayce, we're all eternal souls on a journey home, and understanding that changes everything about how we live right now.